in the mucosa and submucosa. Now these are temporary folds that you would see in an empty or near empty stomach. What are they called?
Rugae? The rugae?
The rugae, yes, the rugae. And again, they will flatten out when you take food in your stomach and it starts to stretch the walls of the stomach. But you can see these, which are visible actually to the naked eye, those are the rugae. You can see them nicely on those models. Okay? And if you look on your lab objective sheet, going back to the first page, page 8, under stomach, goes through the regions which we talked about before. It talks about the curvatures and omentum, rugae, and the muscle layers. And I notice it says gastric pits. The stomach mucosa has these tubular indentations in the mucosa called gastric pits. And that's what we see here. These are the gastric pits. And then connected to that, and even deeper, are tubular indentations called gastric glands. They contain some very important cells that are responsible for the secretions of the stomach wall. We're going to look at these. Let's first
what is that?
what?
That little circle thing.
This thing?
Yeah.
That's just a bubble on the cover side. And that's just some debris up there. Dust or something. See? Turn it off. Okay. So again, the folds, the rugae, the indentations here, the gastric pits, and then continuous to that are the gastric glands. So we're going to look at these in a little more detail and look for some of the cells that are associated with the gastric glands. And gastric glands, again, secrete some very important things that I'd like you to know, the cells and also their secretions.
Does that have a special name for it? That long
What?
piece that goes up?
What? This?
No, the one on the far left.
Over here? These are just the gastric.
No, the big structure.
What, here?
Yeah.
That's submucosa, which we'll get into in just a minute. All right, let's look at this a little higher magnification. All right, so again, we can see gastric pits, these indentations, and then the gastric glands which are continuous with them, which are deeper than the gastric pits. Okay? Now, there are 4 types of cells in here that I'd like you to be able to identify. And we're going to be looking at the gastric glands. All right, up at the top of the gastric glands, where they join the gastric pits, right in here, okay, when they come up, there's a cell in the neck region of the gland. It's called the mucous neck cell. And the name tells you what it does. It secretes a protective mucus to protect the stomach lining. Remember, the stomach is full of protein digesting enzyme and also hydrochloric acid, very concentrated. Without protection, you simply digest away your stomach lining. So you're producing this protective mucus from these cells, mucous neck cells, and you're also constantly replacing the cells that line the stomach wall. Okay, so again, if you get a pointer up here, and it's in the gastric gland near the gastric pits, you may assume it's a mucous neck cell. Function, to secrete a protective mucus to protect the stomach lining. As we go down in the gastric glands here, okay, and these are gastric glands, concentrated more toward the middle of the gastric glands are what are called parietal cells. Now, the parietal cells actually have kind of pink granules in them, but here it's hard to tell. I don't have a contrast. But some of these cells, you'll see, if you look at it under the microscope, they have pink granules of cytoplasm. Those are parietal cells. They have 2 important secretions. One is intrinsic factor. What does intrinsic factor do? What's its function?
Digest.
Get what?
It helps digest, or yeah, absorb.
Absorption of what?
Vitamin
Vitamin B12. Okay? It's produced by the stomach, works in the small intestine, it's required for vitamin B12 absorption. Why do we need vitamin B12? for proper maturation of red blood cells. Otherwise, you go into what's called pernicious anemia. You have these large abnormal cells that can be very serious. Okay? So, the intrinsic factors, one secretions of parietal cells required for vitamin B12 absorption, which occurs usually in the small intestine. The other secretion is hydrochloric acid. What are the functions of hydrochloric acid? Anybody remember?
Kills organisms coming in with the food.
Three things, three major functions. One should be obvious. It kills microorganisms that come into your food. It's a very hostile environment. Most organisms cannot survive in the stomach because of the low pH, very acidic. Okay? That's one thing it does. What else does it do?
Denatures protein.
It denatures proteins, okay? That aids in protein digestion. Proteins are big clumps of amino acids in a big wad usually. It's real hard to get a protein digestion enzyme in there to break the bonds to hold the amino acids together. But it's a lot easier if you first unravel the molecule and have these chains of amino acids. Then your protein digestion enzymes can simply break the peptide bonds between amino acids and make smaller chains. That's exactly what happens. So it denatures the proteins and facilitates protein digestion, which, by the way, starts in the stomach. Okay? We saw carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth. Protein digestion begins in the stomach. Okay? What's the third thing hydrochloric acid does?
It activates pepsinogen.
That's right. It activates the protein digestion enzyme, which is secreted in inactive state called pepsinogen. It becomes pepsin, so it can digest your food and not your stomach lining. Okay? You got a cell largely made of protein. If you have an active protein digestion enzyme, what's going to happen to the cell? You're going to digest the cell. All right? So what happens is it's released in inactive state. When it gets up to the luminal stomach where the concentration of acid is high, it's activated, becomes pepsin, and starts breaking down your proteins. Okay? So three things HCl does: kill microorganisms, denature proteins, and activate pepsinogen, convert it into pepsin, to digest your proteins. Okay? All right, there's a third cell type, which is concentrated more at the base of the gland. This one's kind of more of a violet color. That's called the chief cell, or zymogenic cell. These are the enzyme secreting cells, and the major enzyme again is pepsinogen, which is converted to pepsin to break down your proteins. Okay? Also concentrated here is another cell type which I don't expect to point out, but it's called an enteroendocrine cell, and it's just that, it secretes hormones. And the major one is gastrin, which you should know. What does gastrin do? It's a hormone, not an enzyme. So it's released into the blood.
Stimulates the release of the gastric juice.
Stimulates release of gastric juice, which collectively are secretion of parietal and chief cells, which go in the lumen of the stomach. What else? What's the stomach do with your food? When it gets in there, it starts churning. That's muscle activity. So it stimulates gastric motility. The churning action of the stomach, which breaks the food into smaller pieces prior to chemical digestion, and also evacuation of the stomach. You got to move the food from the stomach into the small intestine. That's muscle action. So gastrin again stimulates gastric juice secretion and gastric motility. The churning action of the stomach and the movement of food from the stomach into small intestine. Okay? So those are four cells: mucous neck cells, parietal cells, chief cells, enteroendocrine cells. You should know what they do. All right, at the base, or the edge, basically, of the mucosa, we have a layer of smooth muscle. Okay? You can see a little bit right here. The smooth muscle marks the outer boundary of the mucosa. It's called the muscularis mucosae, to distinguish it from the thick layer of muscle called the muscularis externum, which is responsible for muscle moving in the stomach wall. Okay? Deep to that is this stuff, connective tissue, and that's the submucosa. And then we have the muscle layers. So again, mucosa, submucosa, and then the thick muscle layers, you can see right here. And again, this is smooth muscle, and it's arranged in two bands in most of the GI tract. The inner band adjacent to the submucosa is arranged how? Circular. Okay, it's around the circumference of the organ. And the outer band,
Longitudinal.
longitudinal. It runs roughly parallel to the longitudinal axis of the organ. So basically run like the length, parallel to the length of the intestine. Okay? So inner circular, outer longitudinal. Now on the very edge here, you see this dark line here? That is serosa, which is a thin membrane, okay, simple squamous, a little bit of loose connective tissue, and it's synonymous with the visceral peritoneum. Many of the organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity are covered with visceral peritoneum. So remember, you got a serous membrane here. The visceral layer of the membrane covers the organ. The parietal layer lines the cavity. In this case, the abdominal pelvic cavity, with the exception of those organs which are retroperitoneal. Okay? I'll mention those in just a minute. But again, this is serosa, and it's synonymous with the visceral peritoneum in this case. Okay? So mucosa, the layers. Okay, here's the mucosa. Here's the submucosa. Here's the muscularis or muscularis externa. Inner band, longitudinal. So if you ask the type of tissue, smooth muscle, the arrangement, circular, and longitudinal. And if I put a pointer on this, don't give me the whole wall. You don't need to impress me with your knowledge. Answer the question. Because I often get that. I'll put it on here and say, what type of tissue? Okay, smooth muscle, and then you'll say circular, longitudinal. And I'll say, which one? I got a red line through it, okay? Be specific, okay? Now, if you read your book, you'll notice there is a third layer of muscle in part of the stomach wall. And that's an oblique layer that runs diagonally, and that's actually the innermost layer, but it's only in the body. And if you look at our slides, they say pyloric region. So please don't ask me, point out the oblique layer, if you bother to look at the slides, that is, okay? I can't show it to you because it's not in the pyloric region, but it is in the body. Okay? But for the most part, you're going to see two layers, which you see here. Inner circular, outer longitudinal. And that applies to most of the GI tract. Okay? Stomach, small intestine, and large intestine, although it's modified in the large intestine, as we're going to see. Okay? Any questions on the stomach? Yes?
Is that the serous membrane right outside of the longitudinal?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of the covering.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the covering organ facing the body cavity.
And that's synonymous with the
In this case, it's visceral peritoneum.
Yes. Okay.
And it is in all organs except for those that are retroperitoneal. But you still have the serosa.